What if the story of the West took a different turn? What if, in a moment of fear and division, conservative movements hardened into something far more severe, reshaping Europe and the United States under the iron grip of the far right? This is not pure fiction. It's a vision born from today's debates, magnified, accelerated, and projected forward. And in this timeline, freedom does not flourish, it fractures. Before we continue deeper into this scenario, I want to pause for just a moment. If you're finding this what-if exploration thought-provoking, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into possible futures. But more importantly, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How do you see today's debates shaping tomorrow? Leave a comment below and join the discussion. Your perspective could shape the next story we explore. It began with a promise of order. Conservative leaders spoke to those who felt left behind, families who longed for stability, workers disillusioned by global markets, communities unsettled by cultural change. They spoke of tradition, of faith, of defending the nation's heritage. They called for walls against outsiders, laws against dissent, and loyalty above all. At first, their words sounded familiar, echoing campaigns of decades past. But slowly, the movement hardened. The Restoration, as it named itself in the United States, swept elections with promises to defend morality, faith, and family. In Europe, the High Council unified once fractured parties into a single bloc, wielding nationalism as its weapon and tradition as its shield. By the mid-2035s, conservative populism had transformed into something unrecognizable. Not merely a political current, but a governing force determined to reshape society in its own image. The first casualties were political rivals. Left-wing organizations were stripped of funding, their rallies restricted, their leaders investigated under charges of disloyalty. Universities known for progressive thought were restructured, their curricula rewritten to align with heritage values. In the United States, the Restoration passed sweeping laws to limit anti-national influence, effectively criminalizing leftist movements. In Europe, the High Council disbanded long-standing social parties, declaring them threats to unity. Across both continents, conservatism was no longer one voice among many. It was the only voice permitted to speak. Immigration became the cornerstone of the new order. The Restoration called outsiders a danger to culture, jobs, and faith. Walls were extended across borders, not only of steel, but of law. Families seeking refuge were turned away. Camps grew at the edges of Europe, guarded by drones and soldiers, their permanence undeniable. The High Council declared that citizenship must be earned, not by years of residence, but by blood and heritage. Policies stripped minorities of rights, pushing them into second-class existence. Across the Atlantic, the Federation's registries tracked every newcomer, every deviation in language, dress, or faith. The message was clear. The longing was no longer about shared values, but about origin. Religion, long a private matter in many Western nations, was revived as a pillar of national order. Prayer returned to schools, morality laws tightened, and leaders invoked Scripture as justification for policy. The Restoration in America framed itself as the guardian of faith and fatherland. The High Council in Europe declared Europe's Christian roots sacred and untouchable. Secular voices were not outlawed, but they were drowned under the weight of sermons broadcast on state media and laws shaped by conservative morality. Though religion did not dominate every decree, its shadow hung over the halls of power, reinforcing a worldview where tradition and obedience merged. At first, businesses celebrated deregulation and tax breaks. But soon, economic freedom bent to political loyalty. Corporations that aligned with the Restoration thrived. Those that resisted found themselves taxed, fined, or quietly dismantled. In Europe, oligarchs tied to the High Council controlled entire sectors, rewarded for their allegiance. Ordinary workers promised security, instead faced stagnant wages and shrinking rights. Strikes were outlawed, unions dissolved, and anyone demanding redistribution was branded as a socialist saboteur. What was once free enterprise became a loyalty economy, where prosperity was purchased with obedience. Surveillance expanded under the banner of safety. Smart cameras in European cities tracked faces and even emotions. In America, predictive algorithms built profiles of suspected anti-patriots, flagging them before they acted. Journalists, once the watchdogs of power, were muzzled. Some fled abroad. Others stayed silent. Television reduced itself to patriotic parables and religious devotionals. Music and art were stripped of experimentation, forced into the service of heritage. In both continents, dissent was not crushed in a single moment. It was eroded, day by day, until silence became second nature. The climate crisis, once urgent, was reframed as a distraction. Renewable energy projects were shut down in the name of protecting jobs and sovereignty. Coal and oil returned as symbols of strength. In Europe, the High Council dismantled environmental treaties, calling them chains on growth. In America, the Restoration mocked climate science as a leftist hoax. Floods, fires, and droughts grew worse, yet propaganda claimed they were natural cycles, nothing more. The cost of denial was written into the earth itself. A subtle but undeniable current ran through both regimes, the question of ethnicity. In speeches and policies, a preference for heritage citizens emerged. Employment programs prioritized those who fit the cultural mold. Schools revised history to celebrate majority identities while erasing contributions of minorities. It was never declared openly as racial supremacy. Instead, it lived in subtle exclusions, quiet privileges, and policies that narrowed who truly belonged. Over time, societies divided into insiders and outsiders, with laws ensuring the gap never closed. For many citizens, life continued with strange normalcy. Streets were orderly, crime fell, and symbols of unity filled public squares. Families heard familiar prayers in schools, workers received wages on time, and cultural festivals celebrated heritage pride. To those who longed for certainty, the system seemed almost comforting. Yet beneath the banners and slogans, freedoms had withered away. People learned to censor their own words, not because of fear of prison, but because of the weight of constant surveillance and the risk of being labeled anti-national. Still, resistance survived. Underground groups spread encrypted messages, art hidden with coded symbols, gatherings disguised as prayer circles or study groups. They carried fragments of a different memory, of protest, diversity, open debate, and secular freedom. Their numbers were small, their reach fragile, but they reminded the world that submission was not universal. Beyond Europe and the United States, the effects were profound. Democracies once allied with the West looked elsewhere for leadership. Trade blocs fractured. New powers in Asia, Africa, and South America filled the vacuum. International cooperation on climate, migration, and technology stalled. Humanity's shared progress slowed, while authoritarian systems gained legitimacy by pointing to the West's hypocrisy. The regimes on both sides of the Atlantic believed themselves unshakable. They built monuments to tradition, declared themselves guardians of civilization. Yet corruption spread, economies faltered, and climate disasters grew too severe to ignore. Young generations, raised under banners of obedience, yearned for more. They whispered of choice, diversity, and freedom. The fortress of tradition had cracks, and through those cracks, light began to shine. So we are left with a question. What if democracy does not fall in fire but in silence? What if liberty is not stolen in a single night but traded away piece by piece in the name of faith, tradition, and security? In this imagined future, the far-right takeover of Europe and America does not arrive with violence, but with applause. It uses today's debates, immigration, climate, inequality, morality, not to solve them, but to weaponize them. The path we glimpse here is not inevitable. It is only one possibility, drawn from the fears and divisions of our present. The question is not, what if this happens? The question is, will we allow it?